Savannah, Georgia, July 9th, 1964. In the heavy stillness of that morning, when the air felt stuck and the whole city breathed with lazy reluctance, Lydia Mae Turner, a housemaid almost invisible to anyone who had never lacked a thing, leaned over an old pot where scraps of soap simmered. Scraps most people would have thrown away. It was just a habit inherited from her mother. Use everything, stretch the little you have, survive however you can. But something in that mixture changed shape, gained a sharper smell, a texture that seemed to come alive again. Lydia didn't know it, but that quiet gesture would be the first tremor of a transformation no one saw coming. Because this is the story of a simple, tired, underestimated woman who lived between short paychecks, other people's pots, and long nights where hope and fear shared the same table. What she found that morning wasn't luck or miracle. It was the beginning of a slow turning point, built on stubborn courage, small discoveries, and choices that would echo for generations. Lydia thought she was just reusing soap. In truth, she was reigniting a destiny that would change everything. But before we continue with the video, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is over there. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Lydia Mae Turner arrived at the Whitmore house before the sun even touched Savannah. The old floorboards greeted her with a familiar creak, a reminder that she worked in a world she would never truly enter. The morning light filtered through tall windows, turning dust into floating gold. Lydia tied her worn apron, pressed a hand to her aching back, and moved quietly across the kitchen. She knew every corner of this house, which cupboard groaned, which stair squeaked, which window stuck during humid days. She knew it better than its owners ever would. Before starting breakfast, she set a small pot on the stove, her private habit. Inside it, she dropped leftover soap scraps she'd saved from the week. As they melted, she added crushed mint leaves, just like her mother used to. A smell rose that reminded her of home. Simple, poor, stubbornly clean. Mrs. Whitmore entered just as Lydia placed the coffee tray on the counter. "Soap again?" she asked, looking at the pot. Lydia felt heat climb her neck. "Just a habit, ma'am. My mama taught me not to waste anything." Mrs. Whitmore leaned in slightly. "It smells better than the store brands." Lydia froze, not because of the compliment, but because no one had ever noticed. Later, while she dusted the upstairs hallway, Mr. Whitmore found her. "You make that soap yourself?" he asked, holding one of the rough, uneven bars she'd left cooling in the kitchen. "Yes, sir," he nodded slowly. "Resourceful. Small habits can be worth more than people think." The words stayed with her the rest of the day, soft but unsettling, like a knock she wasn't sure she should answer. That night, after walking home past leaning porches and barefoot children, Lydia stood alone in her tiny kitchen. Everyone was asleep. The room smelled of old wood and quiet sacrifice. She lit a lamp, took out her pot, and melted another batch of scraps. The mint scent rose again, gentler this time. She watched the mixture thicken and whispered, almost afraid of her own voice. Maybe this isn't just about saving, maybe it's about making. She didn't know why her chest tightened. She didn't know this moment was a seed. But the next morning, 2 neighbors would knock on her door, both wanting the last bar of her handmade soap. And that small inconvenience would be the first crack of a door that poverty had kept shut her entire life. Before the first light touched Savannah, 2 women were already at Lydia's door, speaking in hurried whispers. They weren't there for gossip or sugar or flour. They wanted the same thing, another bar of her mint soap. Lydia stood in the doorway, surprised, holding her shawl tight around her shoulders. She promised to make more, though she had no idea how she would manage it after a full day of work. On the walk to the Whitmore house, she kept hearing their voices in her head. People didn't usually want anything she made. They wanted her labor, her hours, her strength, but not something crafted by her hands alone. When she stepped into the Whitmore kitchen, Mrs. Whitmore noticed a new light in her eyes. As Lydia prepared breakfast, the woman picked up the small bar cooling near the stove. She held it near her face and inhaled. "My sister asked if she could buy a few," she said lightly, as if it were nothing. "If you're willing." The words landed softly but shook Lydia more than a shout would have. Buy. Someone wanted to buy something she made during the quietest hour of her life, when the world wasn't watching. Later, while hanging linens in the heat of the afternoon, a neighbor from across the yard paused at the fence and asked where she'd purchased that lovely mint soap. When Lydia admitted she'd made it, the woman asked for 3 bars, as if it were obvious Lydia had more. It wasn't obvious to Lydia. By the time she walked home, her mind felt louder than the cicadas buzzing in the trees. That night, long after her family slept, she stood in her dim kitchen with a single lamp glowing weakly above the stove. She set her pot down, not with the sleepy instinct of habit, but with a cautious intention she had never allowed herself before. This time, She didn't melt scraps. She used a full bar of cheap soap, something she had always considered a luxury to spare. She crushed fresh mint leaves between her fingers and stirred slowly, watching the mixture turn smooth and pale. For the first time, the scent rising from the pot didn't just remind her of home. It reminded her of possibility. When the bars cooled, she wrapped 3 of them in plain paper and tied them with thin twine. They looked simple, humble, almost shy. But as she placed them carefully on the counter, something shifted inside her, something small, like the first flicker of a flame no one else could see. The next morning, those 3 bars would leave her house before she even tied her apron, and Savannah, without knowing it, had just met the very beginning of something that would outgrow its own birthplace. The next week unfolded in Savannah with a heat so heavy it seemed to cling to Lydia Turner's skin as she walked the long road toward the Whitmore house each morning. The city had a way of waking slowly, especially in the poorer neighborhoods where people didn't rise because they wanted to, but because life didn't offer them the luxury of sleeping in. Lydia's shoes pressed thin dust clouds into the air with every step, each cloud glowing faintly in the weak dawn light. Inside her home, before she left, she had counted the coins in the jar on the shelf, a habit she wished she didn't have to keep. The coins made a sharp, metallic sound as she moved them between her fingers, and she could feel the tension in her husband's shoulders from across the room. The amount was the same as always. Not enough. It was never enough. Bills waited like predators on the table, half hidden under a chipped ceramic plate. She knew she'd have to choose which ones to pay, and which ones to pretend didn't exist for another week. The only new thing in her kitchen that morning was the small sheet of brown paper where 3 names had been written in pencil, neighbors who had asked for her mint soap. It looked almost silly, that little list, too hopeful for the reality she lived in. But something in her refused to throw it away. By the time she reached the Whitmore house, the sky was turning gold behind the magnolia trees. The air smelled of damp petals, wood, and old brick. Savannah had a way of mixing sweetness with heaviness, beauty with weight. Lydia stepped through the back door quietly, as she always did, and tied her faded apron around her waist before the family woke. Inside the kitchen, her pot from the previous night sat cooling in its spot, still carrying a faint fragrance of mint. The Whitmores had guests staying for 2 days, and that meant more work, more cleaning, more polishing, more moving silently from room to room until the house looked like wealth lived there effortlessly. While Lydia cracked eggs and set bread to toast, Mr. Whitmore entered. He was dressed for work, his suspenders stretched neatly over a crisp white shirt. He had the posture of a man who owned not only his time, but the time of others. "Morning, Lydia," he said, picking up one of the wrapped soap bars sitting near the window. "Your soap has made its way around town." She froze. "Sir, my wife's sister took a bar home yesterday. She says she wants more. You might have started something without meaning to." His tone wasn't mocking or threatening. It was observational, as if he had noticed a small flame somewhere and wondered whether it would stay small or burn into something larger. Lydia didn't know how to answer, so she simply nodded and kept her eyes on the pan. Mr. Whitmore turned the soap over slowly in his hand. "You ever think of selling these?" he asked. Selling. The word landed like a stone in her stomach. It felt dangerous, like touching something she didn't have a right to. She stammered, I don't know how things like that work." "Figure it out," he said, but not unkindly. "People pay for quality. Even poor folks do when something truly works." Then he set the bar down and left, leaving Lydia alone with a thought that felt too big to stare at directly. Later that morning, as Lydia swept the long hallway with its tall ceilings and silent portraits, she felt a strange thing tug at her. Not pride. No, she knew better than to let pride grow. It was something quieter, a flicker, a possibility. But possibilities were dangerous things. They often came disguised as hope, and hope had teeth. When she finished polishing the veranda railings, she stepped into the shade for a moment of relief. She wasn't supposed to rest, but Savannah's heat didn't care about rules. A breeze drifted through, carrying voices from the front of the house. Mrs. Whitmore and her guests were discussing a local fair happening in 2 weeks, an event where local homemakers displayed crafts, preserves, and handmade goods. One of the women said, "I heard the stalls last year sold out before noon. Women making jam, quilts, candles, even soaps." Lydia felt the words shift something deep inside her. She swept again even though the woodboards were already clean. Soap, selling, fair. The thoughts came too quickly. She pushed them down. She had chores to finish, mouths to feed, bills to wrestle with. She didn't have time to dream. Dreams took room that her life didn't allow. That evening, after walking home in the fading light, she found her husband sitting at the table again, counting the same tired pile of coins. He had a look in his eyes she knew too well. the look of a man carrying a burden that ground him down inch by inch. "We're short again," he said. She set her bag down and wiped her forehead. "We'll manage." "I don't know how much longer we can manage," he muttered. "The rent's going up next month." Lydia didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell him about the neighbors, the guests, the fair, the possibility, but fear wrapped itself around her thoughts, pulling them tight. He didn't need wild ideas. He needed real money. That night, after everyone slept, she stood alone in the dim kitchen. She removed her pot from beneath the cabinet and placed it on the stove. As she melted another batch of soap, the mint scent rose gently, filling the room like an old memory. The flame under the pot flickered softly, reflecting off her tired eyes. She whispered to the empty room, "Maybe this could help us, maybe just a little." When she wrapped the bars the next morning, she placed them carefully in her bag. She hoped the neighbors would be waiting. She hoped someone would still care. They were. In fact, more than she expected. 3 neighbors met her before she even stepped onto the road, all wanting a bar, all offering coins. Actual coins. Real money in exchange for something she had made with her own tired hands. One neighbor pressed a few dimes into Lydia's palm and said, "This lasts longer than store soap, and it smells kinder." Kinder. Not prettier, not fancier. Kinder. The words softened her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She reached the Whitmore house feeling like she was carrying something delicate, not the soap, the feeling. For the first time in years, she had brought money into her home that didn't come from someone else's orders or demands. It came from her own creation, a small, fragile miracle. Inside the Whitmore house, the day carried on as expected. Guests, chores, a spilled pitcher she cleaned before it stained the rug. But every so often, she touched the inside of her apron pocket where the neighbors' coins rested. She didn't take them out. She didn't need to. The weight of them was enough. Proof that something in her hands had value. In the late afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore found her in the laundry room, folding linens with slow, methodical care. "My sister sent word," she said. "She wants 10 bars next time she visits." Lydia stared at her, unsure if she'd heard correctly. 10 bars felt like a mountain, the kind she wasn't sure she could climb. "I don't know if I can make that many," she whispered. Mrs. Whitmore tilted her head. "You made the one on our sink, and it hasn't worn down. That's worth something. Worth something." The words wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't feel allowed to wear. When Lydia walked home that evening, the sky was streaked with orange and violet, the colors stretching wide across the horizon. She held her bag close, feeling the bars she still hadn't sold shifting inside. She passed neighbors sitting on porches, swinging quietly on creaking chairs. She passed children chasing each other barefoot. She passed tired men returning from long days. All of them lived under the same weight she did, the weight of not having enough. But tonight, her steps felt slightly lighter, only slightly, but enough to notice. When she stepped inside her house, the room felt smaller than usual, as if her thoughts no longer fit easily within its walls. She lit a small oil lamp and sat at the table, spreading the coins she had earned into a small circle. It wasn't much, a few dimes, a few quarters. Nothing close to solving her problems, but they were hers. Her husband entered the room and stared at the coins. Where'd that come from? She hesitated. Then, softly but firmly, she said, "I made it." There was no boast in her voice, no trembling, just truth. He didn't speak for a long moment. He simply looked at the coins, then at her, as if trying to understand something that didn't fit the world he knew. Finally, he nodded slowly and said, Maybe that's something." Lydia exhaled, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That night, when she finally lay in bed, she stared at the dark ceiling and listened to the sounds of her small house settling, the creak of old wood, the distant hum of cicadas, the soft breathing of her daughter asleep. Money hadn't arrived, not yet. At least not the kind that changed lives, but something else had, a beginning. And beginnings, she realized, were often quieter than people expected. Lydia Mae Turner woke before the sun again, but this time she wasn't headed straight to the Whitmore house. She moved through her little kitchen with a kind of nervous energy, the kind that rises in a person when something new is pressing against the edges of their life. The brown paper list on her table had grown since last week, now 6 names instead of 3, each one hoping for a bar of her soap. And on top of those names sat a message Mrs. Whitmore had passed along the evening before, 10 bars for her sister. Soon, 10. The number haunted Lydia all night. It felt absurd, like being asked to build a house when she'd only ever carved small pieces of wood. Yet the request also stirred something fragile in her chest, a fragile confidence she was afraid to touch. By the time the first hints of daylight crept into the kitchen, Lydia had laid out everything she owned that could help her. Half bars of cheap store soap, scraps collected in a cloth pouch, mint leaves gathered from the small patch of dirt behind her house, and an old knife that had lost its shine years ago. She warmed water on the stove and placed her pot where she always did, but this time she didn't stir lazily or without thought. Everything was deliberate. She was no longer melting scraps for survival. She was making soap for people who wanted it, people paying for it. It was a small thing, but in her life, small things were never small. She cut the soap into pieces, dropped them into the pot, and watched them soften into a thick, pale mixture. The mint filled the air, mingling with the scent of steam and wood, but the pot wasn't big enough. If she kept going like this, she'd never reach 10 bars. She needed more space, more tools, more time, more of everything she didn't have. Her daughter walked in, rubbing her eyes. "Mama, you up early again?" "A little earlier than usual," Lydia said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Got work to do." Her daughter looked at the counter, at the mint, at the pot. "People really like your soap, don't they?" Lydia didn't know how to answer. She simply said, "Seems they do." When the mixture thickened enough, she poured it into the few molds she had, mismatched tins she'd saved from old cookies and candies. She tapped them gently to release air bubbles, set them in the cool corner of the kitchen, and prayed they'd harden faster than usual. She didn't have time. Not for this. Not for dreaming. But somehow, she was doing it anyway. By the time she reached the Whitmore house that morning, she felt the weight of the day pressing into her back. She tied on her apron, wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, and got straight to work. She prepared breakfast, cleaned the parlor, dusted the stair rails, and washed linens, all while thinking of the bars cooling at home, wondering whether they would set right or crumble in her hands. Mrs. Whitmore noticed her distraction. "You seem tired today." "Just didn't sleep much, ma'am." "Is everything all right?" Lydia hesitated. Confessing her fears about soap felt childish, even foolish. But something in Mrs. Whitmore's tone felt genuinely curious. "I'm trying to make a larger batch of the soap you like," she said softly, "but I'm not sure I can." Mrs. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "You'll manage. You're resourceful." The word again. Resourceful. Said like a compliment, but heavy like a burden. After lunch, the Whitmore's baby spilled a jug of milk across the kitchen floor. Lydia kneeled to wipe it up, and as she scrubbed, her mind drifted to the pot at home, the cooling bars, the list of names on her table. She felt pulled in two directions, the life she had and the life that might be waiting if she dared to reach for it. But reaching had never been safe. By the time her shift ended, her feet ached, her back throbbed, and sweat clung to her skin. Still, she walked home faster than usual. She needed to see the soap. Needed to know whether all the work, all the hope, all the fear had been for something. When she opened the door, the kitchen smelled faintly of mint. She rushed to the corner where the tins sat and gently pressed a finger to one of the bars. Firm, but not fully. The edges were uneven, the surface still too soft. She scraped one bar out and watched it crumble slightly at the corner. Her throat tightened. How was she supposed to make 10 bars when she couldn't even make 4 perfectly? She sank into the chair, rubbing her temples. The walls around her suddenly felt too close, as if the room itself was shrinking. She heard her husband's footsteps before he entered the kitchen. "Rough day?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He picked up a crumb from the broken bar and sniffed it. "Smells good. That don't matter if it falls apart," Lydia whispered. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the soap crumbs on his fingertips. "Maybe you just need better tools." She almost laughed. Tools cost money, and they were barely keeping up with rent and groceries. But he wasn't wrong. She needed something more than scraps and mismatched tins. That night, while her daughter slept and her husband read quietly in the next room, Lydia lit her lamp again. The flame flickered against the low-beamed ceiling, casting soft shadows across the walls. She took out her pot, reheated the mixture that had stuck to the sides, and began again. She chopped more mint, focused more carefully on the ratios, stirred with slower, deeper strokes. Her hands moved with the muscle memory of her mother's lessons, long nights of boiling laundry soap during times when money was too thin to stretch. She whispered to the empty room, "Come on now, hold together." Hours passed. The house fell silent. The mixture smoothed. The cooling bars looked promising this time, still soft but shapely. She wrapped the old tins with cloth to help them cool evenly. This had to work. It simply had to. The next morning, she barely had time to check them before leaving for work, but when she pressed her finger into one bar, it held firm, not perfect, but whole. She smiled for the first time all week. At the Whitmore house, as she swept the parlor, Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, adjusting her pearl earrings. "My sister arrives tomorrow," she said. "Do you think you'll have the soap ready?" Lydia swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. I'll have it." Even though she wasn't sure. Even though 10 still felt impossible. Even though her hands still smelled faintly of fear and mint. After her shift, she practically ran home. 6 bars were good, 2 were cracked, 1 was too soft. 1 had a blemish across the top that looked like a scar. 8 decent bars. 2 she'd need to remake, and less than 24 hours left. Her heart pounded. She had never worked this hard for something that belonged to her. She heated the pot again, scraped the leftovers, and started 2 more bars from scratch. Every movement felt urgent. Every second mattered. She crushed mint until her fingers stung. She stirred until her wrist ached. The kitchen grew hotter and hotter, the flame beneath the pot fighting the heavy Savannah night. When the last 2 bars cooled, she whispered a prayer over them, the same prayer her mother used to say when food was scarce or rain refused to fall. Hold, please just hold. She barely slept that night, waking every hour to check the bars like they were newborn children. By dawn, she knew they were ready. 10 bars. 10 real, solid, fragrant bars. She wrapped them in brown paper, tied each one with twine, and placed them gently in a small wooden box her father had carved decades ago. The wood smelled faintly of cedar, a smell she hadn't sensed in years. She wiped the box clean and closed the lid carefully. On her walk to the Whitmore house, she held the box close to her chest. Neighbors waved, children ran by her feet, but she didn't stop. She didn't speak. She just kept walking, the box warming slowly in her hands. When she stepped into the Whitmore kitchen, Mrs. Whitmore was waiting. "Did you bring them?" she asked. Lydia nodded. She placed the box on the counter and lifted the lid. The scent of mint filled the room softly. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes widened a little, just a little, but enough for Lydia to notice. "These are lovely," she said. "Truly lovely." Lydia lowered her gaze. "I hope they're good enough." "They're better than good enough." For a moment, Lydia couldn't breathe. Mrs. Whitmore set the box aside and turned to her with a surprisingly warm expression. "You did this, Lydia, and people want it. Don't underestimate what your hands can do." Lydia felt something shift inside her, something deep, something old, not pride, not hope, something sturdier. She returned to work, dusting the shelves and washing dishes, but her heart kept drifting back to the box in the kitchen. 10 bars, 10 real bars. She had done something she wasn't sure she could do, and by evening, as she walked home through the warm Savannah twilight, she held on to one quiet truth. She had just taken her first true step towards something larger than survival, something that didn't belong to the Whitmores, something that didn't belong to poverty, something that belonged only to her. Savannah greeted Lydia with a heavy, unmoving heat on the morning after she delivered the 10 bars. The sky hung low and swollen, as if the city itself were holding its breath. She walked the long dirt road toward the Whitmore home, with a strange mix of exhaustion and wonder, the kind that sits just beneath the ribs, the kind that keeps a person awake, even after a sleepless night. She had done it. 10 bars, a number that had felt impossible. Now it was behind her, but the weight of possibility hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown heavier. When Lydia entered the Whitmore house, she could hear Mrs. Whitmore's sister talking in the parlor. Her voice, warm and lilting, carried through the hallway as she praised the scent of the soap. "I swear, this smells fresher than anything I've bought in Atlanta," she said. Lydia kept her steps quiet, as she always did. She didn't want to intrude, didn't want to be caught listening even though the words weren't meant to hurt her, but she heard her name anyway. "This Lydia woman, she made them herself?" the sister asked. "Yes," Mrs. Whitmore replied. "And she made all 10 bars in just a few days." 10? My goodness, she must be very skilled. "She's determined," Mrs. Whitmore said, and Lydia felt something warm spread in her chest, though she tried to ignore it. Determined, not resourceful, not clever, determined. It felt like a step forward, a small one, but one that landed with more weight than anyone except Lydia would understand. As the day wore on, she cleaned the upstairs hall, polished the silver set in the dining room, and mended a torn sheet in the laundry room. But all the while, she could hear small pieces of conversation drifting from the parlor. The sister asking if Lydia took orders. Mrs. Whitmore mentioning how quickly the bars had sold in the neighborhood. The sister wondering aloud if she should bring some bars back to Atlanta for her church group. Atlanta. The word itself felt impossibly large in Lydia's ears. A place where buildings stretched tall and business moved fast. A place far removed from her small kitchen and its battered pot. But then, as quickly as hope rose, fear followed. Making 10 bars had nearly broken her. She had stayed up for 2 nights. She had worked while exhausted, while anxious, while unsure. She had burned 2 batches, cut her knuckle on a dull knife, and nearly spilled boiling soap on her foot. Her kitchen wasn't a workshop. Her tools weren't tools at all. They were scraps and memories, nothing more. The thought of making more, of taking orders, felt like standing on a ledge. That afternoon, after serving tea, Lydia stepped outside to hang linens on the backyard line. The cloth fluttered weakly in the faint breeze. She reached for a clothespin, and her hands trembled, just slightly, but enough for her to notice. Too tired, too stretched, too much. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the warm savanna air fill her lungs. She tried to steady herself, but something inside her chest pulled tight. She wasn't just tired, she was afraid of what came next. When she returned home that evening, the kitchen was dark except for a single oil lamp on the table. Her husband sat hunched over his worn boots, threading old laces through the cracked leather. "You're late," he said, though without anger. "Had extra chores," she answered quietly. He didn't respond immediately. He tied the last knot on the laces, pulled the boot onto his foot, and exhaled through his nose, a sound heavy with frustration. "Rent's due Friday," he said. Lydia nodded. "And we're still short." She nodded again, though her throat tightened. She had known this. She had counted the coins herself. Even with the soap money, they didn't have enough. Her husband rubbed his temples. "I've been asking around for work. Nothing steady, just day jobs here and there. Won't be enough." Lydia set her bag on the counter and leaned against the chair. "We'll figure it out." "We always say that," he muttered. "But figuring it out keeps getting harder." Lydia stayed silent. She knew there was nothing she could say that would change the truth of his words. He glanced toward her bag. "You make any more of that soap today?" She shook her head. "I can't make more right now. I need rest." He didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Later that night, after her family slept, Lydia stood alone in the dim kitchen. The counter still carried faint specks of soap from the previous days. Her pot, cleaned but worn, sat beside the stove. Her hands hovered over it for a long moment. Then she pulled them away. She couldn't keep doing this. Not like this. Making 10 bars had consumed her, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to do it again. Not while working full days. Not while money hung over her household like a storm cloud. She extinguished the lamp and went to bed, but sleep didn't come. The next morning, her exhaustion clung to her like humidity. She walked into the Whitmore house slower than usual, her steps dragging slightly. She told herself she could carry the day anyway. She always did, no matter how tired, no matter how heavy her heart felt. But in the late morning, something happened that cracked her composure. While polishing the parlor floors, she accidentally knocked over a glass pitcher. It fell onto the rug, the cold water spilling across the fibers. The pitcher didn't break, but the noise was enough to make her jump. Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway. "Are you all right, Lydia?" "Yes, ma'am. Just tired." Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms. "You've been tired all week." "I'm fine," Lydia insisted, though her voice wavered. "You're not," Mrs. Whitmore said gently. "Sit for a moment." "I can't sit," she repeated softly. Lydia obeyed. She sat on the small stool near the window, hands folded tightly in her lap. Mrs. Whitmore knelt to help wipe the spilled water, then placed the cloth in the basin. When she stood again, she faced Lydia directly. "My sister asked about placing a larger order," she said. "She thinks she could sell your soap at her church, maybe even more than that." Lydia's breath caught. I don't know if I can make that much." "Not alone," Mrs. Whitmore replied. "But with help, maybe." "Help? Yes. A small loan, perhaps, or better tools, or someone to guide you." Lydia shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am. I can't borrow money. I can't owe anyone." Mrs. Whitmore studied her with an expression Lydia couldn't decipher. Part sympathy, part curiosity, part something else entirely. "You're not just making soap, Lydia," she said. "You're making something good, something people want. But if you're going to keep going, you'll have to make a choice." "A choice? To stay where you are," Mrs. Whitmore said softly, "or to stretch beyond it." The words lingered like heat in the room. Lydia returned to her chores, but her thoughts spiraled. Stretch beyond it. She wasn't sure she could stretch any further without breaking. When she arrived home that evening, her husband was waiting at the table with an envelope in his hands. The sight of it made her stomach sink even before he spoke. "It's from the landlord." She took the envelope, opened it with trembling fingers, and read the paper inside. Rent increasing. Payment due in 5 days. No exceptions. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred at the edges. "We can't do this," her husband said. "We can't pay this." Lydia folded the letter and set it on the table. Her heartbeat pulsed in her throat. "I'll make more soap," she whispered. Her husband stared at her, unsure. Will that be enough? It has to be. He didn't argue, maybe because there was nothing else to rely on. That night, Lydia lit her lamp again. Her hands moved toward her pot as if pulled by invisible threads. The fear in her chest didn't disappear, but something stronger rose alongside it. Desperation. Desperation had driven many women before her, but it was what came after desperation, the choice, that made stories different. She made one batch, then another. She cut mint until her fingers smelled of it. She stirred until sweat dampened her hairline. She poured until her arms ached. The kitchen grew hotter and hotter, and at one point she wiped her forehead and left a streak of mint-scented oil on her brow. Her daughter watched from the doorway. "Mama, you okay?" Lydia forced a smile. "I will be." But at midnight, exhaustion finally caught up to her. She reached for her pot and misjudged the distance. Steam hit her wrist and she jerked back with a sharp cry. The pot nearly tipped, sloshing boiling soap dangerously close to her feet. She caught it just in time, her heart hammering, the skin on her wrist pink and throbbing. Her husband rushed into the room. "Lydia!" "I'm fine," she whispered, but she wasn't. The pain pulsed through her arm, and tears pricked her eyes, not from the burn, but from the fear that she had underestimated the cost of this dream. He looked at the pot, at her trembling hands, at the half-cooled bars on the counter. "This is too much," he said. "You're doing too much." Lydia met his eyes. Her voice was barely a breath. "We don't have another choice." He didn't argue, but he looked at her the way a man looks at a candle burning dangerously close to the wick. She wrapped her wrist in a cool cloth and continued working, slower, more cautious, but still working. By dawn, she had made 12 bars. 12 imperfect, uneven, beautiful bars. When she wrapped them in paper, her hands shook, not from pain, but from the terrifying realization that she had crossed a line between fear and decision, a line between surviving and trying. The bars weren't perfect, but neither was she. And yet here they were, the proof of her choice. She walked to the Whitmore house with her wrist aching, her body tired, and her heart carrying something new. The understanding that every opportunity demanded a toll, and she had just begun paying it. Savannah woke to the low rumble of distant thunder the morning the name came to her, not as a grand idea, not as a revelation, but as something that rose from the quiet corners of memory. The sky hung gray and swollen over the magnolia trees, and a warm wind swept through the streets, as if the city itself were carrying a warning. Storm coming, change coming. Lydia May Turner walked toward the Whitmore house with the wooden box of 12 bars tucked carefully in her arms. Her wrist still throbbed beneath the cloth bandage, a reminder of the price she had already paid. She cradled the box close, each step careful. She had worked past pain, past exhaustion, past fear. Now, all she had to do was deliver the bars. Nothing more, nothing less, and hope they were enough to keep her family afloat for another week. When she reached the Whitmore back door, Mrs. Whitmore was already waiting. Her hair was neatly pinned, her dress crisp, her posture perfect, the image of a woman born into steadiness. She opened the door gently. "You're early," she said. "I needed to bring these before the rain starts," Lydia replied softly. She set the box on the kitchen table and lifted the lid. Mrs. Whitmore leaned in. The bars were uneven, a little rough, marked with the imperfections of handmade work. But the moment she inhaled, her eyes softened. The scent of mint drifted through the kitchen like a small, calming wind. "They're beautiful," Mrs. Whitmore said. Lydia shook her head. "They're rough." "Beautiful," the woman repeated. For a moment, they stood in silence, the rain beginning to patter against the windows. Lydia felt something loosen in her chest, something she had held tight for so long it had nearly fused with her ribs. As Mrs. Whitmore wrapped the bars carefully into a traveling bundle for her sister, she paused. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" "Do these soaps have a name?" Lydia blinked. "A name? Yes. People will want to refer to them properly, if you're selling them." The word selling hit her like a wave. She steadied herself with one hand on the counter. A name. She had never thought of naming anything. Her life wasn't built on naming, but on doing, on cleaning, cooking, scrubbing, surviving. Names were for things that lasted, and she did not know yet if her soap would last. "I don't have one," Lydia murmured. "Then think about it," Mrs. Whitmore said, tying the bundle tight. "If you're going to keep going, your work should carry your voice. Your work should carry your voice." The words followed her through the house as she worked, through the laundry room, through the dining hall, through the long gallery where tall portraits stared down at her like silent witnesses. Her work had never carried her voice before. Her work had carried other people's names, other people's meals, other people's comfort, but now it might carry hers. Thunder cracked outside, a low rolling sound that vibrated through the wooden bones of the Whitmore house. At midday, while she scrubbed the front steps, Mrs. Whitmore's sister left for the train station with the bundle of 12 bars. Lydia watched from the shadows, hidden behind the porch beam. She'd never seen her work leave Savannah before. It felt like watching a bird she raised fly into the sky, too small to reach that far, yet somehow still going. When the guest carriage pulled away, Mrs. Whitmore came to stand beside her. "She'll tell people," she said. "You'll soon have more demand." Lydia's heart spasmed with both fear and anticipation. "I'm not sure I can keep up." "You won't have to," Mrs. Whitmore replied. "You'll find a rhythm, a better system. You'll learn." Lydia didn't answer. Learning was a luxury she wasn't sure she could afford. That evening, as she walked home beneath a sky thick with unfallen rain, Lydia felt the city pressing against her like a warm, damp hand. Every boarded-up shop, every sagging porch, every rusted tin roof seemed to whisper something she didn't want to acknowledge. You are standing at the edge of something. She reached her house just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Inside, her daughter was setting the table while her husband mended a loose chair leg. "You're late again," he said, not unkindly. "Had to make sure the bars got delivered," she replied. He glanced at her bandaged wrist. "You can't keep working like this." "I have to," she said. "Rent's due." He didn't argue. A man who had wrestled with poverty his entire life knew when there was nothing to argue against. During dinner, her daughter asked, "Mama, what are they going to call your soap?" Lydia froze, spoon halfway to her lips. "Call it?" she repeated. Her daughter nodded enthusiastically. "Everything people like has a name. Candy, shoes, flour, books. Why not your soap?" Her husband chuckled softly. "She's right. You make something good, it ought to be called something." Lydia sat back in her chair, the spoon lowering slowly. A name. Again the idea returned, no longer gentle but insistent. After her daughter went to bed and her husband fell asleep in his chair, Lydia sat at the kitchen table with a small piece of scrap paper and a dull pencil. Rain tapped lightly at the window. The lamp flickered. She wrote the first word that came to mind. Mint soap. She stared at it. Too plain, too simple, too easy to forget. She wrote another. Savannah soap. She scratched it out. Too big, too bold, too distant from who she was. Her eyes drifted to the wooden box sitting on the counter, the one her father carved. Her finger traced the old cedar grain. She whispered his last name under her breath. Turner. She said it again. Turner. The word felt steady, firm. It carried the weight of the people who came before her, people who had worked fields, washed laundry, hauled bricks, scrubbed floors. People who had survived on skill and grit and stubborn hope. Turner. She added one more word, simple but true, pure. She whispered it aloud. Turner's Pure. Then, breathing slowly, she wrote, Turner's Pure Soap. The pencil shook slightly as she looked at it, not from fear, but from the enormity of seeing something that felt alive. It was hers, her name, her work, her story. A small, trembling smile touched her lips. She folded the paper and tucked it inside her apron pocket, as if protecting a delicate seed from wind and rain. The next day at the Whitmore house, Mrs. Whitmore noticed the distance in Lydia's eyes as she kneaded bread. "Did you come up with a name?" she asked. Lydia hesitated, then removed the folded paper from her apron. She placed it on the counter. Mrs. Whitmore unfolded it carefully, as though it were something precious. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Turner's Pure Soap, she read aloud. Hearing another person speak, it felt like candles being lit in Lydia's chest. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. "It's perfect, strong, honest." Lydia breathed out, a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "I hope so," she whispered. "You don't need to hope," Mrs. Whitmore said. "You've built something real." But building meant more work, and reality meant more sacrifices. Lydia felt that truth rising like heat from the kitchen floorboards. That afternoon, as she scrubbed the veranda and the storm clouds gathered again, a woman from across the street called out to her, "That mint soap, you sellin' more soon?" "Yes, ma'am," Lydia replied. "Then put my name down," she shouted above the gusting wind. "And use that name you got now, that Turner something." "Turner's Pure Soap," Lydia corrected softly. "That's right," the woman said. "Write me down for two. Two, small but real." The storm finally broke just after sunset, a hard rain drumming against roofs and earth. Lydia walked home soaked to the bone, her shoes heavy with wet dirt. But for once, she didn't feel small beneath the storm. Something in her felt anchored, her feet still in the mud, yes, but her heart finally standing upright. When she entered her house dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor, her husband stood from the table. "Bad storm," he said. "Yes," she answered. Long day, she nodded. He saw the paper in her hand. What's that? She handed it to him. He studied the words. Turner's Pure Soap, he read slowly. Then again, Turner's Pure Soap. He looked at her, really looked at her. That's good, he said. That's real good. She swallowed hard. The storm outside rumbled, but inside the house, something steadier took root. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the rain ease into a soft patter, Lydia whispered the name to herself one last time. Turner's Pure Soap. It felt like a promise, like a beginning that had been waiting for her all along, like a small fire that, if guarded gently, might one day become a blaze. And Savannah, without knowing it, was about to say that name far more often than Lydia could imagine. Savannah woke warm and bright the morning Turner's Pure Soap grew faster than Lydia could follow. She arrived at the Whitmore house with her wrist still bandaged, carrying the quiet ache of too many late nights. Before she could start breakfast, Mrs. Whitmore stepped into the kitchen holding a letter from Atlanta. My sister sold every bar, she said, and she wants 50 more. The number stunned Lydia. She had barely survived making 12. 50 felt like standing in front of a tall staircase with no railing. She steadied herself on the counter, trying not to let panic show in her face. I don't know if I can make that many, she whispered. You don't have to do it alone, Mrs. Whitmore said gently, but you should think seriously about this. People want your work. The words followed her all day as she swept the hall, washed linens, and polished the silver. Everyone wanted more soap. Neighbors, her church ladies, even the man at the corner store. It should have felt like a blessing, but instead it pressed against her ribs like a heavy hand. That evening, when she reached home, 3 women waited on her porch. They each asked for bars, offering coins before she could refuse. Lydia promised to make more, even though she didn't know how she would. Inside, her husband watched her counting the small pile of money. This is getting big, he said quietly. Too big for one person. We need the money, Lydia replied, exhausted. I can help, he said. Let me. For the first time, she didn't argue. They boiled soap together late into the night. Mint leaves scattered across the table, pots steaming, the house thick with heat and hope. Their daughter helped wrap the bars as they cooled, her small fingers smoothing the paper proudly. But the work was punishing. Lydia's wrist throbbed, her hands shook, and at one point she nearly dropped a pot of boiling soap. Her husband caught her arm just in time. You're pushing yourself too hard, he whispered. I can't stop now, she said. People are counting on me. The next day, a neatly dressed woman from the Savannah Women's Club visited the Whitmore house. She held one of Lydia's bars, turning it carefully in her hands. This is good, she said. Very good. If you want to grow this, we can help you. Tools, supplies, proper molds, whatever you need. Lydia's breath caught. Help was a dangerous word. Too often just another version of debt. But the woman added softly, no repayment, just opportunity. Lydia looked down at her bandaged wrist, her cracked hands, the faint scent of mint clinging to her apron. She had been running so hard just to keep her family from slipping backward. Now, suddenly, someone was asking her if she wanted to move forward. She lifted her eyes slowly. I'll try, she said. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't certainty. It was something smaller, but stronger, a beginning. And Savannah, without realizing it, had already started whispering the name Turner's Pure Soap. By the time the summer of 1971 settled over Savannah, Turner's Pure Soap was no longer just something Lydia made in her kitchen. It had outgrown the stove, outgrown the chipped pots, outgrown the shelves her husband built by hand. It lived in small shops, in church fairs, in grocery counters, in Atlanta parlors and Savannah back porches, and people kept asking for more. It happened slowly at first, a few stores willing to stock a dozen bars, then a distributor offering a contract, then a banker asking Lydia if she'd ever considered opening a real workshop. At each step, Lydia hesitated, as if every opportunity might vanish the moment she touched it. But her hands, the same hands that once scrubbed floors and counted leftover soap scraps, kept moving forward. Her husband worked beside her now, no longer out of necessity, but out of belief. Their daughter wrapped labels on the table, humming softly, while the mint-scented bars cooled in neat rows. The house was always warm, always noisy, always crowded, but the stress that once sat heavy in their walls was slowly replaced by something steadier. One morning, a letter arrived from a distributor in Charleston. They wanted to place Turner's Pure Soap in over 100 stores. Lydia read the letter twice, then once more. She held it with trembling fingers, her breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Lydia, her husband said quietly, this is big. But she didn't smile. Instead, she sat down slowly, as if the weight of the moment might knock her off her feet. She wasn't thinking about numbers or stores or contracts. She was thinking about her mother boiling soap in a dented pot on winter nights, thinking about scraps saved, pennies stretched, hands cracked from work no one saw. She whispered, "Mama wouldn't believe this." Her husband put a hand on her shoulder. "You made something real. You did." A few weeks later, Turner's Pure Soap moved into its first rented workspace, a modest brick building near the river, big enough for real equipment but small enough to remind Lydia where she came from. The windows rattled when the wind blew, the floor was uneven, and the air smelled like old lumber. But to Lydia, it felt like the beginning of a new world. She signed the lease with ink-stained fingers. Her name looked strange on paper, strong, permanent, alive. They bought a copper kettle from a closing bakery. They bought proper molds from a company in Tennessee. They ordered their first bulk shipment of oils, scents, and paper labels. Each new step felt terrifying, as if she were walking across a bridge built plank by plank beneath her feet. But by the end of that year, Turner's Pure Soap wasn't just a local product. It was a business, a real one, with customers she'd never meet, checks she never expected, orders so large she had to hire 2 women from the neighborhood to help keep up. And then came the number no one in her family had ever seen. A local accountant tallied the year's invoices, expenses, orders, and projections. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and read the total aloud. "Mrs. Turner, your company is valued at over $5 million. Lydia didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply gripped the back of her chair, steadying herself, because the room suddenly felt too full of air. 5 million. From scraps, from mint leaves, from a habit learned in a kitchen with a leaking roof. When she finally found her voice, it came out as little more than a whisper. "I just wanted to keep the lights on." The accountant smiled gently. Sometimes the biggest things grow from the smallest reasons. That night, Lydia walked home through the warm Savannah dusk. The cicadas buzzed. The magnolias swayed. The river glimmered under the street lamps. She carried no money, no papers, no contracts. Just a quiet, trembling disbelief that the world had opened in a way she never dared imagine. Inside her house, her daughter was setting the table for dinner. Her husband stirred a pot on the stove. The air smelled like cornbread and mint, the scent that had followed Lydia for years. Her daughter asked, "Mama, are we rich now?" Lydia knelt, brushing a curl from the girl's face. "We're steady," she said softly, "and steady is all I ever prayed for." Later, after the dishes were washed and the lamps dimmed, Lydia stepped outside onto the porch. Fireflies drifted in the dark like floating embers. She closed her eyes and breathed in the night. For the first time in her life, the future didn't scare her. It waited for her. And as the wind shifted gently through the magnolias, she whispered into the quiet. It started with scraps and ended with a name, Turner's Pure Soap. A name born in a small, hot kitchen. A name carried by hands that once belonged only to survival. A name that would outlive her, because sometimes the simplest things become a family's greatest legacy.